filming my training this week, doing lives. Sometimes you just gotta like work out and not record it. You know? It's like every now and then I'm just aware of the fact that everybody is recording themselves all the time. Isn't that weird? Isn't it weird? Everything that you do, you get out a phone and you record it. I find that very strange. There was a time when I would just try to capture my training progress on video. And if people caught you doing it, they would say you're a narcissist, right? Or if you're in the early days of putting up YouTube videos, they'd say, I don't know what that is. What are you doing? You know, back in 2007, 2008, I'm putting up videos talking about how I'm living out of my car in the back parking lot of the gym because I'm so busy. I can't make it on time to all my sessions. So I just go get a burrito down the street on my cheat days. And admittedly, after a while, I'd buy, 4 wine coolers, chug those things down, pass out for 4 hours, wake up, and start my first training session. And oftentimes I wasn't sleeping much at all because for the most part I was just on nothing but high protein. All I would eat a good 85 to 90% of the time was just protein powder, tuna, chicken, almost zero fat, almost zero carbohydrates. I did that for years, and I would work 17 plus hours a day. I won a lawsuit that actually proved that I worked not 14 hours, which I thought was actually 17 hours, 17.1 hours a day or something like that. It was very surprising. So I tried to do that as long as I possibly could. And that's when, a lot of things took place there that I would talk about if I had more, if I had a lot less stress and a lot more freedom to just sit down and discuss the facts. And because I could recollect a lot of these events verbatim, but I was right there in the heart of Silicon Valley during the time, and I was around people and had clients that put Google together. I remember a guy coming in with the first iPhone that was handed to him by Steve Jobs. It's like not 10 minutes ago, just down the street, this phone was just handed to me by Steve Jobs. He was like freaking out as if he just got, this gift from this god. And I knew people like from Theranos, right? Sunny Balwani, he was one of my clients. 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖘𝖙𝖊𝖗. Many people, right, that are right in, and then many people I don't talk about, don't discuss. Many people that were involved in government, that were developing technology, where the guy comes in one day and he's like, we just got out of this meeting and we just got this awesome approval. I can't talk about it anymore, but we came up with the technology for a 100-mile-per-gallon car. This is back in 2007. And so we're just meeting with like the presidential council or some shit like that about what we're going to do with this whole thing. It was all happening in Silicon Valley. Everything. Even Waymo has now more recently, over the past 5 to 10 years, been running a very successful autonomous vehicle program where they've been taking their employees to and from work for years with their vehicles, right? So when people think that, I would talk to people and they'd be like, oh, what would you do? Does that make you nervous? I saw one in Las Vegas and I'm like, there's companies that have been using that flawlessly for years. The government's going to tell you a narrative of what they want to tell you, So what I wanted to discuss, though, and come on very briefly while I'm doing my walk, And I don't know. I might do a live stream with some chest and back, but I just have a lot of things to work on. I still have my hamstrings and calves to work on, but it's been a really cool week. I've been able to really focus in on my training, but it almost seems like a setup where when we think within our own so-called 𝕯𝖚𝖕𝖆𝖈, pleroma, right? When we think about the most advantageous scenario that we could think of as far as having everything that we need in order to facilitate and do that which we really know within ourselves will be building us up on a multifarious scale, many levels, and then pushing us further toward a successful union in this, but more so touching the people that we love, our beloved family members and the people that we hold near and dear, to be able to affect them in a positive way, right? So that's really what the last week has looked like. More than just the last week, but like the last week, I got this huge set of dumbbells sitting next to me, right? I have more supplements, food, and supplies than I have had. I've got, 10 gallons of water sitting here. These 2 big jugs of water that my son got me, plus another couple of gallons that are cold in the refrigerator. I mean, this might all sound like trivial things to most people, but sometimes it's just having the continuous resources without any breaks to where, at least you have a running start, right? So having everything taken away, stripped over and over again, having these rituals done on me over and over again, and I could get into depth and have in the past talked about this, but when we go off on these trails, we really, have to give way for complete and total empirical explanation, right? And at least show the directive in totality of what I'm describing. There has to be sort of like this physical proof that I represent, and there has to be a sort of a before, during, and after event process that I'm displaying as well, right? Looking at the forensics of the crime scene, so to speak, right? So it's been really strange for me to see the manifestations of the things that I was very cautious and curious about, and then to see those things that at one time I thought, yeah, I must be crazy for thinking this way, for thinking in a more ecological, geometric, sort of John Dee, Alan Turing sort of, that I, just put up a couple papers on in community posts if you want to look deeper into that, and up on esoteric principles of light as well. A lot of times these talks aren't as articulate as I want them to be, because I don't like just sitting down and running my mouth. I'm a thinker. I like to think. I do think it's extremely important to express oneself, but to late I've been thinking, to whom? To whom am I expressing myself? Even if I get along with somebody, which isn't important, but the fact that this person is receiving, or there's a inception of this energy is affecting this other person in such a positive way that it's bringing a release and bringing them closer to being able to rectify an issue that has been keeping them back for quite a while. That's not how the reference that's taken for information these days. It's consumed, excuse my language, but shit back out, right? Like this quote on the most recent post that I saw on Kurt Jamungel's Theories of Everything channel, and he's talking about how there's this famous quote that I think I put up here, where it says, "Man is essentially just an angel, an angelic being, or a godlike being with an anus," right? And a lot of people have been talking about that. Like J.J. Vance likes to joke about that. He'll play excerpts from people talking about these sort of things, these ideations. But it's like in a very, you know, even though that's more to be considered euphemistic, that is one of the main processes of attack of these occult rituals, where they attack people. And I made a reference on the bottom of that video where I'm like, look, anything that purges data essentially has an anus, right? So when we get into this, we're talking about when you get back into the Magi, the distaff, the Zoroastrian cover head of Zarathustra, the Zoroaster, on many of these publications, you'll see the Magi pointing to the right, right? But when you get into the fact that if that person isn't protected from the back, you get into the fact of why Crowley talked about doing these rituals, and they often had this homoerotic, strange, 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖘. I mean, when you look at the OTO and sex magic, that's really what's being discussed here. They try to gloss it over, right? But what they're really talking about is this universal, uniform process, right? That gets into deviation. It's to take this purified form and to say, look, you may consider yourself pure, you may be purified, but to us, like, you're inside this prison and now you're food, right? And that's essentially what everyone goes through in their own families. What I witnessed and what I've witnessed is the more focused you are on purifying yourself, the more you are literally, stones are throwing at you. You're hung up on a proverbial cross, right? They refute you, right? Like I talked about before, grandma's teaching their favorite grandson, you got to be tough, and telling them about exploits that they had, sharing information that is denaturing the purity of that individual. But from her perspective, giving this grandchild a chance to go out into the world and make something of themselves. But it is a corrupted world, right? So we're teaching our offspring to further the process, the ritualization of this corruption, which I have laid out. And in EPL, I call them anti-principles, and they are 100% going against the main, what we would call godly principles, right? Without the idea, and then really when you get into the idea, it's just like when you think from an empirical perspective of proof, you have to literally put yourself in the position of kind of like, what if there was a God, right? And how would that God think, right? And when you get into this, there are absolutes, right? So when we talk about purity, we're not talking about it from a Nazistic perspective. I remember years ago realizing the divinity, if you will, of the number 88, and how it had nothing to do with 88 and the Nazis or white supremacist, organizations. But 88 is, like 8 itself is a divine number. And 88 is a divine number generator, right? It's something that brings about and clarifies that this is, in fact, a very positive number subset that hints at infinity, right? And so it's used in numerology as an expression of perpetual creativity, right? And I remember writing this above the doorways and seeing a miraculous change in the energy, right, occur, okay? And so I wrote it over all these doorways. I tried not to make it too, inconspicuous, really. In other words, trying to look like I'm trying to hide it or whatever, but just wrote them above there. And so my mother sees it, who is, I believe, a practicing witch. All the people around her, Like, she proclaims herself as a Christian, like so many people do, but all the people around her are either pedophiles year after year, over and over again. Strange Mormons, Masons, high-level Masons. She would go and work for people uh, like who the hell is that? I'm not even going to get into talking about things, but she's worked for actual celebrities doing nannying and things like this. I mean, we're talking about someone who's very dark, very deviant, right? Who I know for a fact is a practicing witch. I know that about my ex-wife as well. I know it because I've seen her, the people she's around. I've heard her talk about it. I've heard the voices that they have both admitted that they've heard. And I know that those things are exactly what they followed in order to get these big, huge payouts. I've watched these people do terrible things and come from total destitution and poverty, where they were thrown out of towns and thrown in jail and even convicted for certain things, and then all of a sudden they're on the rise and they have this big old pile of money. This big old payout just comes to them, right? Because they were people who would sell out their very offspring. They would sacrifice everything. This is part of the ritual that is involved as an entered apprentice into these occult communities, right? So anyway, that's where we're going to end it right now. But I'll discuss this with a lot more clarity and more perspective on my next live streams, because I really want to get into this. It's very important.